And good day, everybody who's here. It is a pleasure to be here today and to be able to share with you on the topic on AWS capabilities to ensure PCI, NIST, and FFIEC compliance on AWS. As mentioned, my name is Carl Camp, and I'm joined by my colleague today, Sabrina Petruzzo from AWS, where both of us work as solutions architects for our credit unions and other financial services customers. Now, our customer conversations, as you may imagine, often involve discussing a bank's or a credit union's or financial institution's security posture on AWS. And that is really no surprise, since financial institutions face unique risks and regulatory challenges that need to be addressed in any environment. The requirements are constantly evolving, whether it be from a government policy change or advances in technology that require updates to current standards. Every continent or country or even state that you may be operating in have different regulatory requirements, and operating a new region requires being familiar with those unique risks and challenges. The security threat landscape is also constantly evolving, so staying one step ahead of an attack is paramount to the viability of a financial institution. Also, financial institutions deal very closely with, as you can imagine, people's finances, which means stringent reporting and documentation is necessary to see where, who, what, and why anything happened during a transaction. And then finally, there's simply a limited amount of security and compliance specialists that have deep and broad expertise across all security compliances that financial institutions have to operate in. Now, and financial institutions have quite a few of those standards to think about, as you can see on this slide here. So from certifications and attestations to law and regulations of a region or country to alignments and frameworks, you as a financial institution have to think about all the different local and global standards in order to make sure your financial institution is viable to operate. Now, some of these standards, hopefully that you've seen here, are fairly familiar to you. However, I want to dive deeper into a couple of those specifically PCI DSS, NIST, and FFIEC, which are some of the most common compliance requirements that we hear our customers having to work with in the space, especially when operating on AWS. Now, before I do that, I do want to briefly mention the shared responsibility model. You probably saw in the previous presentation the shared resiliency model. This is very similar, but I do want to quickly recap it. If you're running on AWS, this shared responsibility model can help relieve your operational burden as AWS operates, manages, and controls the components of hosting the operating system and virtualization layer down to the physical security of the facilities in which the service operates in. Now, you as the customer then assume the responsibility and management of the guest operating system, which includes updates and security patches. You also are responsible for other associated application software, as well as configuration of the AWS provided security group firewalls. Now, just to summarize this, right, this is a great benefit for you because this alleviates some of the responsibility to AWS, but as a user of AWS, you do have some responsibilities to ensure you're configuring your AWS environment to meet the unique compliance needs of your financial institution. And with that, let us dive into those specific compliances. And first, let us start with PCI DSS, which stands for the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. Now, if you're planning to incorporate using credit or debit cards in your financial institution, you will need to meet this requirement. And so, which basically means in virtually every case, this is going to be everyone. So if you're a financial institution, you probably have to meet this compliance standard. Now, this is administered by the PCI Security Standards Council, which includes MasterCard, Visa, JCB, Discover, and American Express. Now, in this compliance framework, you have 12 requirements or industry rules that need to be met to ensure you're meeting compliance. Now, some of these are fairly common that you would expect. For example, protect your data at rest and in transit, or to protect against malware. Some of these For example, number 9 here would include having a shared responsibility of AWS. So for example, AWS would be responsible for the physical security, while you as the user of AWS would be responsible for the data classification. Now, meeting these industry rules should allow you to then broadly protect your members' finances as a financial institution. Now, the next one I want to discuss briefly is the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework, or another way to put it is NIST CSF, which is a voluntary framework comprised of best practices to help organizations of any size and sector to improve their cybersecurity. It uses existing standards to scale across borders, evolve with technological advances, and provide economies of scale. It was originally intended for critical infrastructure, but is now applicable across all organization types. Now, in the NIST Cybersecurity Framework Core, security, as opposed to PCI, is divided across 6 domains within 23 categories with 108 subcategories. So it's quite a bit to think about. Now, some of these categories will actually be familiar from PCI, such as data security, which would involve encryption at rest and encryption in transit. Now, some of these are more specific to NIST, such as supply chain risk management. And so being aware of not only the different compliance frameworks, but also where they overlap and where they don't overlap is necessary to ensure you're still meeting both compliances without compromising your organization's operational integrity. And finally, we have the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council, or FFIEC framework. Now, you've probably, especially in these times, heard about your money in a bank being FDIC insured up to $250,000 from the US government, right? Well, in order for a financial institution to claim that, they have to meet the FFIEC compliance. Now, this council consists of the FRB, FDIC, NCUA, OCC, and the SFPB bodies, and they have an assessment tool to help measure a financial institution's cybersecurity posture across 2 domains. Those being inherent risk profile, which includes technologies and connection types, delivery channels, really just a broad array of different technological insights. And then we also have the cybersecurity maturity model. All right, so I know that was quite a bit of information on each compliance, but each financial institution has to think about these. So this is very important, especially in the United States, to ensure they are secure not only on AWS, but also on premise. Now, when it comes to shared responsibility model on AWS, the question that we have is, are there tools that AWS provides that can help organizations to ensure that they're meeting compliance while operating on AWS? And for that, I want Sabrina to come on and discuss that.
Cool. Thanks, Carl.
So hey, Sabrina.
Yep.
I just, before you get into that detail, Uday, excuse me, with the Federal Reserve had a question for Kevin. And Kevin, maybe if you could unmute yourself. Uday had a question, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but you address it. During high volatility and demand during peak times, how does the AWS serverless architecture support scalability? I'm assuming the answer is by design, but maybe you could comment a little more, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. So the ability to scale out for things like API Gateway or AWS Lambda or AWS Fargate are all built into those services. There are some caveats you need to keep in mind. So let's say, for example, you're using Lambda and you built your application with Java Spring Boot, and maybe it has a cold start time. In that case, you may use provisioned capacity to avoid cold starts. And in those cases, you can configure auto scaling to help that provisioned capacity also scale along with the service. But the core compute components of the services will scale out automatically.
Uday, I unmuted you. Did you want to add anything to that? I'm not sure your microphone's on. but it's always good getting questions like that.
Yeah, that's great.
I think Uday is just soaking that all in. If there is something you'd like to add as a follow-up, just let me know. Now let me finish up with Sabrina talking about how AWS can help ensure compliance with, I don't know, like I lost track if there's 100 acronyms or 200 acronyms or what. So let's see how Sabrina can help you keep track of all of them.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. Yeah, so the architecture diagram here depicts the different services we recommend to our credit union customers to evaluate for compliance. So on the right-hand side here, we have some example workloads that customers might be running within a VPC. And on the left-hand side, we have 4 of our security services that customers can use with these workloads to evaluate for compliance. Those services are AWS Config, AWS Identity and Access Management, AWS Security Hub, and AWS Audit Manager. And just to give an overview of these services, AWS Config aids in change management and assesses whether your resources are configured to align with your compliance requirements. IAM allows you to control permissions within your AWS environment. Security Hub performs automatic checks against security and compliance best practices. And Audit Manager aids in evidence collection to simplify compliance assessments. And instead of just speaking on all these services, I did want to show you all what they actually look like within the console. So for today's session, I'm going to focus primarily on Security Hub and Config, but if anyone would like to set these services up themselves, Carl and I did publish a workshop that actually walks through this exact architecture, and we'll have a QR code for that at the end of this session. So now let me go ahead and pull up my console. Okay, so like I mentioned, Security Hub runs automated checks against best practices for security compliance. Here is my Security Hub dashboard where I have a summary of my security scores, as well as my finding count based off severity. So when you first enable Security Hub, you will enable different security standards. So if we go into here, we're able to view all the different security standards that Security Hub provides. And the 2 that I did want to highlight are the NIST and the PCI DSS security standards. Those are the 2 that Carl touched upon. And let's just go ahead and go into the PCI DSS one to take a deeper look on what that looks like. Okay, so when we open up our PCI DSS security standard, we're able to view all the different controls that Security Hub is running for us and checking for us. So we can view our compliance status, so whether this specific control or this specific check has failed or passed, as well as the different severity level. And if we wanted to view all of our different findings across multiple security standards, so for example, if we enable NIST as well as the PCI DSS security standard, and want to view our findings across all of those, we can go into our findings tab here on the left-hand side. And once that loads, we're able to view all of our findings within our environment. We can view the severity level, the region that this finding was created within, our account ID, the exact resource that's causing this finding. And you can actually go into each of these specific controls here to view some more information. So if we click on the title here, so for the first one, we can click on VPC flow logging should be enabled in all VPCs. We're able to view the related requirements. So you can see that this one actually relates to the CIS AWS Foundation's benchmark, as well as the NIST standard and PCI. And within this, this finding here, we're able to view the AWS account that this finding's within, the exact resource that's causing this finding, as well as some recommended actions towards remediation. So that is a quick overview of how Security Hub assists with compliance. I also wanted to show how Config assists with compliance. So let me go ahead and go into my Config dashboard. So let me go and open that up. Okay, so it's still loading. But essentially, this is my config dashboard, and I'm able to do a summary of how well my resources are aligning with my compliance standards, as well as the configuration settings that I'm evaluating against. And here I can see my resources that are marked as non-compliant, as well as just an inventory of all the resources found within my AWS environment. So config does use something called rules to evaluate whether your resources are compliant against your desired configurations. So if we go into the rules tab here, we're able to view all the different rules that AWS provides and manages for us. So there are quite a few rules here. But if you wanted to view the rules where you're just marked as, non-compliant, you could go ahead and filter your rules and view all of your non-compliant rules. So here we have all of our non-compliant rules. We could actually go into one of these rules specifically. So let's just open this one up, for example. And when we open up that rule, we can see a description of that rule. So what this rule is actually looking for, as well as the parameters and the resources that are in scope and their compliance status as well. So you can see here the resources that are marked as non-compliant and causing this rule to fail. And from here, what I would want to do is go ahead and perform some remediation action just to then mark these resources as compliant. And with config, we also have something called conformance packs. So conformance packs are just a group of rules that you can deploy as one unit. So if we go into my conformance pack section here, we can see that I do have a FFIEC conformance pack launched. AWS does provide some sample conformance packs available on GitHub in a YAML file. And all you need to do to get started with this conformance packs is actually just click deploy conformance pack. And if you want to use a sample conformance pack or sample template, you can leave that selected. And then here you can select the dropdown. And this is actually where I grabbed the FFIEC conformance pack that I'm running right here. But I also wanted to highlight that we do have conformance packs for PCI as well as NIST too, in case anyone wanted to play around with those. Feel free to launch those. But once you launch that, it'll go ahead and start running for you and generate this compliance score here. So let's go into this conformance pack that I have running. So my compliance score is essentially giving me an idea of how well I'm aligning to FFIEC best standards. We can also view our compliance score timelines, so whether my score is changing over time, being more compliant or less compliant with FFIEC best practices. And then if we scroll down a little bit more, we can see all the different rules that are within this conformance pack. So again, these are all the AWS managed rules for us. And all of these rules here are going to relate to some FFIEC best practice to go ahead and check how well we're aligning to it. So again, we could filter by compliance status. So let's just go ahead and view our non-compliant rules. And here you have a list of all your non-compliant rules. And again, for example, if we wanted to go ahead and check what this rule is evaluating for, you can go ahead and see the rule details, the parameters, as well as which account is causing this rule to be marked as non-compliant. And again,
Also,
what we wanted.
So Sabrina, we can,
sorry.
Yeah, just due to time, I think we got through. We
Time
can
check?
maybe,
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, yep, that's all I wanted to show for config. Again, Carl and I did publish a workshop on this. So being said, here's the QR code for that workshop if anyone wants to check it out. Hopefully you all learned something about FFIEC compliance, PCI, as well as NIST compliance and the tools that AWS offers. And please feel free to reach out to Carl and I if there are any additional questions.